Hey guys, Dark Skeleton here, and as you may know, Blackrock Mountain Adventure has now been officially announced, and in addition to that, they've released 5 of the 31 cards that will be available by going through the adventure set. Acquiring the cards works essentially the same way as the Naxxramas set, where you went from wing to wing fighting different bosses that reward you the cards at the end of each match. And they've already released 5 of the cards, which we're going to be covering right now. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you want to see me cover all the cards, because I definitely will be covering them as soon as they come out. So first up, we have a legendary, Rend Blackhand, a guy I remember very well from my raids in Upper Blackrock Spire back in the day. He's a 7-mana, 8/4 creature, which is a very odd stat distribution, but his battle cry is very powerful. If you're holding a dragon card, which implies that dragons are now a synergy thing, just like mechs are, you get to destroy a legendary minion. Now what makes that so good is that there's not a player alive who doesn't use some kind of legendaries in their deck. Sylvanas is played in everything, Dr. Boom is played in everything, Ragnaros is played in a lot of things, every warrior has a Grimoire Hellscream. There are a lot of targets for this guy. The thing with Black Knight is that some decks don't run taunts, but I cannot remember the last time I've seen a competitive deck that didn't have at least one legendary inside there somewhere. From the perspective of instantly destroying legendary minions, that's a really strong effect. However, you do have to be holding a dragon, which means you have to have some kind of dragon deck, and it'll take some time to figure out exactly how that's going to work. I imagine they'll take all of the old dragons, the legendary dragons like Malygos, Sarah, who else? Deathwing, I guess, and make them all into dragons, which will synergize with these new dragon cards. But is building a dragon deck going to be worth it? If any dragon decks really do start to hit the meta, then I do think that people are going to be playing Rend Blackhand quite a bit, and as a result, people might start having to construct decks around Rend Blackhand in the same way that they construct decks around BGH right now. Or if not constructing decks, at least playing the game around that card's existence. And to be honest, I think that's really cool because some of those legendary cards have just become so ridiculously dominant, like Dr. Boom for instance, that if you don't have one, you're just playing incorrectly. You're not going to be as competitive as the decks that do have them. But what keeps Rend Blackhand from becoming a must-have in almost every dragon deck is the fact that his stat distribution is really weird. There are a lot of things that could easily take this out. A Frostbolt and a Ping. He's vulnerable to Flame Strike. Basically any kind of removal, and this guy is toast. But if you're able to use Rend Blackhand effectively, he will be a huge tempo swing in exactly the same way that Black Knight is. Next up we have the Grim Patron, which is probably one of the strangest cards in Hearthstone yet. It's a 5-mana 3/3, which is abysmal stats, right up there with Bomb Lobber, but of course when you have cards with stats that bad, you play it for its effect. And this guy, whenever the minion takes damage, you get to summon another 3/3 Grim Patron, which of course is going to have the exact same effect. This means, in theory, you could create an army of Grim Patrons out of one card if you're able to pull it off effectively. However, that's going to be really hard to do without some kind of buff or some kind of supporting card to assist it in its goal. Because, of course, it only has 3 HP, it's going to die to just about anything. But here are a few ideas that immediately come to mind about what you could do with this card. Firstly, Warriors. Warsong Commander. You put this guy out as a 3/3 charge, and you can immediately have it swing into a 2/1 on the opponent's field, or maybe a 1/3 Acolyte of Pain, something weak like that. Now one of the things about that combo is that it says on the Warsong Commander card, if you summon a minion with 3 attack or less, you give it charge immediately. And this card also says that it summons another Grim Patron, which would imply to me that you can actually create as many Grim Patrons in the same turn with charge as long as you have the Warsong Commander and the targets to attack with it. It's really bizarre to think about, but that could be something like the Warrior's equivalent of a Mega Unleash the Hounds. Any other buff card that gives it charge or extra health would also be pretty good with it. Mark of Nature? Maybe. I don't think Mark of Nature would actually be played. But Blessing of Kings could be a really good option. A 7/7 is definitely going to survive. And if you do buff it up to a level like that, it can actually create multiple Grim Patrons because that one creature survived multiple attacks. For that same reason, it could also be very strong in decks like Priest, because Priests can of course heal all their creatures up and get to reuse that effect over and over again. However, the weakness of this card is that your opponent has to have effectively the perfect board setup for this thing to really snowball out of control. For that reason, I think that this card will be niche at best, and probably not used in competitive, because, let's face it, any Legend player is not going to let you set all of this stuff up. You might be able to do the Warsong Commander combo just because you can do everything from your hand for 8 mana, but aside from that, people are going to see this and try to counter it immediately. Next up we have the Hungry Dragon, which is a 4 mana 5/6. That is really good stats. However, of course, it comes with the drawback of summoning a random 1-cost minion for your opponent, so it's effectively, you get a Yeti with 1 extra attack and health by giving your opponent 1 minion on the field. In many cases, I think that could actually be worth it, and just because of the massive stats and the good lineup of this card, it could actually be a card that really gets to see quite a bit of play, especially in Dragon Synergy decks. Now, as for the 1-cost minion that you summon for your opponent, what do 1-cost minions have? Usually less than 3 attack and never more than 3 HP. What does the Grim Patron do? It clones itself when it runs into something like a 1-drop minion. I'm not saying this is going to be the Wombo combo, but this is a potential synergy situation. If you have a Grim Patron on the field, you can play the Hungry Dragon from your hand and immediately get to clone it just by running into the minion you just summoned for your opponent. So that could be one way to boost the consistency of Grim Patron. Now, aside from that, if you just leave the 1-cost minion on your opponent, and let's say your opponent puts something down like a Chillwind Yeti, the standard for 4/5 for 4, then effectively they're just going to trade with each other. If you use the Yeti plus the 1-drop, it's probably going to kill off the dragon, and they're all going to die. So, in that way, the card's pretty balanced. But what you can do to kind of exploit this card is play around the fact that your opponent has 1 more minion on the field. Mind Control Tech comes to mind. Any AoE that happens to pick up the 1-drop for free as well would make this card actually better than the average 4/5. So if you can construct a deck around dragons or other synergy cards like Grim Patron, or just a deck that's really good at completely ignoring that extra 1-drop card, then the Hungry Dragon is actually going to be a really strong 4-drop in the game. I definitely think this card's going to see quite a bit of play. Now, speaking of dragons and dragon synergy, here's another card you can play with your dragon decks, the Blackwing Technician. It's a 3 mana, 2/4, much in the same line that a Tinkertown Technician is, where if you're holding a dragon in your hand, you get a +1/+1, which is different than the Tinkertowns if you have a mech on the field, gain a spare part and +1/+1, but more or less is about equally as good. You're trading off the fact that you're not getting a free spare part to your hand, for the fact that you don't actually have to have the dragon on the field. It just has to be in your hand, which, generally speaking, is easier to do than actually keeping a creature on the field, especially a mech like a Mech Warper. There's not too much else to say about this card other than the fact that if you're playing it in a dragon deck where you can guarantee a dragon in your hand, then this card is going to be a 3/5, which is very, very strong stats for 3 mana. I believe it'll probably be played just as much as Tinkertown Technician is. Whenever people throw together these Dragon Synergy decks, you'll see it with the same frequency as a Tinkertown Technician inside of a mech deck. Next up, we have the new Rogue card, and just like Nexaromus, I believe they're only going to have 1 class card per class. The Dark Iron Skulker. It's a 5 mana 4/3. Of course, you're playing it for the battle cry, which is to deal 2 damage to all undamaged minions. In other words, it's an AoE backstab. For your opponents only, of course. In my mind, that is very, very powerful. Normally, to get the same kind of 2 damage to all enemy minions effect, you'd have to be paying 4 mana for Consecration or 5 for Druid Starfall. But when you compare it to this card, you're effectively getting around the same effect for 5 mana plus a 4/3 minion. Now, of course, there are situations where one of your opponent's minions might be damaged, but in many circumstances, I think you'll actually be able to play this card and get the full effect. When a shaman has a ton of totems on the board, that comes to mind. Mech decks tend to have all these minions that pop out of the piloted shredder and don't take damage before they die. They just are on the field or they're dead. If you play a rogue, then you know that there's almost always some target to backstab. And I believe that the fact that it only targets undamaged minions isn't actually that big of a drawback. So, it's not as strong as a 4 mana Consecrate, but I think to call it a 3 mana spell would be pretty fair. So a 3 mana spell in addition to a 3 mana minion, or a 4/3, that's roughly standard stats, for 5 mana and 1 card, that to me is very, very strong. There might be some decks like newer versions of Miracle Rogue that choose not to run him because he's a creature and not a spell, But for a general rogue deck that's just trying to build up a lot of value, I think this card will be played quite often. And in Arena, I think it'll also be a very strong card. If you follow his Battlecry up with some light damage like a Rogue Dagger or a Shiv from the hand, then it's very likely a Dark Iron Skulker can actually go for a full board clear. So that's all 5 of the Blackrock Mountain Adventure cards that have been announced so far. Of course, you can find the announcement information on Hearthstone.com. I've been Dog Skeleton, thank you for watching. If you want to see the rest of the card reviews as they come out, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you all next time.